in a bombshell turn of events that has sent shockwaves through the legal world and the entertainment industry alike. Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs finds himself at the center of an intensifying federal case, one that is now threatening to spiral out of control. What began as a focused trial on specific, deeply serious charges has now exploded into a tangled web of new accusations, legal warfare, and potentially devastating consequences. Combs, once one of the most influential figures in the music business, is now facing an avalanche of federal charges, including sex trafficking, prostitution, and racketeering. The original trial date was set for May 5th, a mere weeks away, but according to his defense team, that timeline is no longer realistic, because just 2 months before trial, the government allegedly blindsided them with a shocking legal maneuver, introducing a slew of uncharged, redacted, and, in some cases, decades-old allegations that could completely derail the case. These new claims reportedly stretch back as far as the 1980s. Yes, you heard that right. Nearly 4 decades ago. The problem: Combs hasn't been charged for these alleged acts, and in the defense's eyes, that's the entire point. They say the prosecution is trying to win a trial not by the strength of the evidence, but by overwhelming the jury with emotionally charged, unprovable, and highly prejudicial stories that have no place in a courtroom. In fact, they're calling this strategy trial by ambush. In their official motion to the court, Combs's lawyers argue that the government is flooding the case with unrelated and uncorroborated allegations, forcing the defense to scramble with minimal time to prepare. They allege that the prosecution's goal is not to prove the actual charges, it's to portray Combs as a monster, a predator, someone capable of anything, regardless of whether or not the evidence lines up with the charges on paper. And here's where it gets even more complicated. According to the defense, many of the so-called witnesses to these new allegations are now deceased. Others, their identities remain sealed. The court has reportedly barred Combs's legal team from even disclosing their names to him until April 18th, just over 2 weeks before the trial. That's hardly enough time to investigate allegations that span decades and have never been formally charged. The legal argument: the defense is making centers around 3 critical federal rules of evidence. First up, Rule 413, a controversial provision that allows prosecutors to bring up past allegations of sexual misconduct in certain sex crime cases. The defense says it doesn't even apply here because Combs isn't facing direct charges of sexual assault. They claim the government is stretching the rule well beyond its intended use. Then there's Rule 404B, a provision that permits past bad acts to be admitted to show motive, opportunity, or intent. But here's the issue. The defense says prosecutors are trying to use this rule as a loophole to tell jurors that Combs has a history of being violent or sexually aggressive without actually having to prove those things in court. In essence, they're accusing the government of manipulating the rules to create an emotional smear campaign. Finally, the defense leans on Rule 403, a fundamental safeguard in American law. This rule allows judges to exclude evidence if its potential to unfairly prejudice a jury outweighs its relevance. Combs' team argues that the new allegations, especially the most inflammatory ones, have no place in the courtroom because they risk turning the entire trial into a spectacle. A preventive conviction, they say, where the jury convicts out of fear, disgust, or moral outrage, rather than based on actual evidence tied to the charges. Their message to the court is crystal clear. This case is being hijacked. They believe the government, faced with what may be a shaky prosecution on the original charges, is now trying to stack the deck by appealing to the jury's emotions. And if the court allows it, they warn, it will set a dangerous precedent, not just for Combs, but for how high-profile federal cases are handled moving forward. But federal prosecutors are not backing down. In their response, they argue that Combs himself opened the door when he claimed every sex act was consensual. They say that's not just a defense, it's a statement of intent. And if intent is on the table, then so are past actions that demonstrate a pattern. According to the prosecution, this isn't about character assassination. It's about showing that the alleged crimes weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a method, a calculated plan, and possibly the workings of an organized enterprise. They point to the broader conspiracy charge, which ties everything together under the umbrella of a criminal network. And in that context, they argue this evidence isn't just relevant, it's essential. So now the ball is in the judge's court. Will the